Before we dive into the story, drop a comment and tell us what city you're watching from, and remember to rate this story from 0 to 10 at the end. Now let's begin. The kitchen of the Whitmore Grand Hotel gleamed under fluorescent lights, stainless steel counters reflecting the controlled chaos of a Friday night dinner service. Steam rose from pots, flames licked the edges of saucepans, and somewhere in the back, a pastry chef hummed softly while piping delicate rosettes onto a 3-tier wedding cake. That pastry chef was Madison Cole, and she had exactly 14 minutes before disaster struck. Madison didn't know it yet, but her life was about to collide with a man who would turn her world upside down, freeze her out literally and metaphorically, and ultimately teach her that sometimes the coldest hearts hide the warmest souls. She adjusted her white chef's coat, flour dusting her forearms, and stepped back to admire her work. The cake was perfection. Layers of vanilla bean sponge, Swiss meringue buttercream, and hand-sculpted sugar flowers that looked so real you could almost smell their fragrance. This was her masterpiece, the culmination of months spent perfecting her craft at the Whitmore. She loved this job. The early mornings, the scent of caramelizing sugar, the satisfaction of creating something beautiful from simple ingredients. But more than that, she loved the independence it gave her. After years of struggling to make ends meet, working 2 jobs just to pay for culinary school, Madison had finally found her place. Or so she thought. The kitchen doors swung open with a force that made every chef look up. A tall man strode in, his charcoal suit tailored to perfection, his dark hair swept back, and his expression carved from granite. Madison recognized him instantly. Everyone in the hotel did. Nathaniel Archer, the billionaire owner of the Whitmore Grand and a dozen other luxury properties across the country. He was notorious in the industry, not just for his wealth, but for his exacting standards and ruthless business decisions. Rumor had it he'd once fired an entire management team over a single bad review. Madison's hand stilled on the piping bag. What was he doing in the kitchen? Nathaniel's sharp gray eyes swept over the bustling space, taking in every detail with the precision of a man who missed nothing. When his gaze landed on Madison's cake, he walked toward her station, his polished shoes clicking against the tile floor. The head chef, a portly man named Gerard, hurried over, wringing his hands. "Mr. Archer, we weren't expecting you tonight. Is there something I can? I'm here for a quality inspection." Nathaniel interrupted, his voice low and clipped. "I've been hearing complaints about inconsistency in our dessert presentations." Madison's stomach dropped. Complaints? Her desserts were flawless. She'd never received anything but praise from guests and staff alike. Nathaniel stopped in front of her cake, his expression unreadable. He leaned in, examining the sugar flowers with a scrutiny that made Madison's pulse quicken. "Who made this?" Gerard cleared his throat. "That would be Madison Cole, sir. One of our pastry chefs." Nathaniel straightened, his eyes locking onto Madison's. She met his gaze, refusing to look away despite the intimidation radiating from him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Nathaniel reached out and, with one finger, touched the edge of a sugar pedal. It was a light touch, barely there, but Madison saw the faint shimmer of moisture on his fingertip when he pulled away. Her breath caught. The humidity. She'd been so focused on the design that she hadn't accounted for the kitchen's fluctuating temperature. The sugar flowers were beginning to weep, ever so slightly. It was a tiny flaw, nearly imperceptible, but Nathaniel had spotted it in seconds. "This won't do," he said simply. Madison's heart sank. "Sir, I can fix it. If you just give me a few minutes, it's not about fixing it." Nathaniel's tone was cold, final. It's about the fact that it needed fixing in the first place. Standards at the Whitmore are non-negotiable. Gerard shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. Archer, Madison is one of our best. I don't pay for best. I pay for perfect." Nathaniel turned to Gerard. "Terminate her employment, effective immediately." The words hit Madison like a physical blow. Around her, the kitchen had gone silent. Every chef, every line cook, every dishwasher was frozen, staring at the scene unfolding before them. Gerard's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. "Sir, perhaps we could now, Gerard." Nathaniel's voice didn't rise, but the command in it was absolute. Madison found her voice, though it trembled with a mix of shock and rising anger. "You can't be serious. I've worked here for 2 years. That cake is beautiful, and you know it. One tiny issue caused by kitchen conditions I can't control. And you're firing me?" Nathaniel's gaze returned to her, and for a fleeting second Madison thought she saw something flicker in his eyes. Regret? Hesitation? But it was gone so quickly she must have imagined it. "I can. And I am." "Collect your things." Before Madison could respond, before she could unleash the torrent of fury building inside her, Nathaniel turned and walked toward the back of the kitchen. Gerard touched her arm gently. "Madison, I'm sorry. You should go." Madison yanked her arm away. "This is insane. I'm not leaving. Not like this." But Gerard's expression was pained, apologetic and utterly helpless. "There's nothing I can do. He owns the hotel." Madison's vision blurred with angry tears. She ripped off her chef's coat and threw it onto the counter. "Fine. But he's going to regret this." She stormed after Nathaniel, her sneakers squeaking against the floor. He'd disappeared into the walk-in freezer at the back of the kitchen, likely inspecting the inventory. Madison didn't think. She just reacted. She shoved open the heavy steel door and stepped inside, the frigid air hitting her like a wall. Nathaniel was standing near the back, examining labels on containers, his breath misting in the cold. He turned when he heard her enter, one eyebrow arching. "Is there something else, Miss Cole?" "Yes," Madison snapped, crossing her arms against the sudden chill. "There's a lot else. You just destroyed my career over a sugar flower. Do you have any idea how hard I've worked to get here?" Nathaniel's expression remained impassive. "Your work ethic isn't my concern. Results are. And your result was flawed. Because of humidity I couldn't control. Because you're unreasonable. Because you're a cold, arrogant man who thinks money gives him the right to treat people like they're disposable." Nathaniel's jaw tightened, the first crack in his composure. "Careful, Miss Cole. I've already fired you. Don't make me call security." Madison laughed bitterly. "Oh, I'm terrified. What are you going to do? Freeze me out?" She gestured around the freezer, the irony not lost on her. "Too late. You already did." Before Nathaniel could respond, a loud metallic clang echoed through the space. Both of them turned toward the door. It had swung shut. Madison's stomach dropped. "No." She rushed forward and grabbed the handle, pulling hard. It didn't budge. She pulled again, harder this time, her fingers already numbing from the cold. Nathaniel was beside her in an instant. "Move." He gripped the handle and yanked. Nothing. He tried again, his knuckles whitening with effort. The door remained sealed. Madison's heart began to race. This can't be happening. Nathaniel stepped back, pulling a phone from his pocket. He frowned at the screen. No signal. Of course not. We're in a steel box. Madison pulled out her own phone. Same problem. She banged on the door with her fist. "Hello? Can anyone hear us?" Her voice echoed uselessly. The kitchen outside was loud, full of clanging pots and shouting chefs. No one would hear them over the noise. Nathaniel tried the emergency release latch. It clicked uselessly, the mechanism frozen or broken. Madison's breath was coming faster now, visible in the icy air. How long until someone notices we're missing? Nathaniel's expression was grim. "The kitchen staff thinks I left, and they think you were fired. It could be hours. Hours." Madison looked around the freezer. It was large, lined with shelves of frozen ingredients, but there was no heat source, no blankets, nothing to ward off the cold that was already seeping through her thin black pants and t-shirt. She was dressed for a hot kitchen, not a sub-zero prison. Nathaniel, still in his suit jacket, looked slightly better off, but even he was beginning to show signs of the cold, his breath coming in steady white puffs. "This is your fault," Madison said, her teeth starting to chatter. If you hadn't been on some power trip, I wouldn't have followed you in here. Nathaniel shot her a look. If you hadn't stormed in here to yell at me, we wouldn't be in this situation. So now it's my fault for being justifiably angry? Yes. Madison wanted to scream, but her body was already conserving energy, her muscles tensing against the cold. She wrapped her arms tighter around herself, but it did little good. Nathaniel watched her for a moment, then shrugged off his jacket. Here. He held it out to her. Madison stared at it, then at him. I don't want your jacket. Don't be stubborn. You're freezing. So are you. Nathaniel's jaw clenched. I'm larger. I have more body mass. Basic thermodynamics says I'll last longer. Take the jacket. Madison's pride warred with her survival instinct. Finally, survival won. She snatched the jacket and draped it over her shoulders. It was warm from his body heat and smelled faintly of expensive cologne and something else, something distinctly him. She hated how comforting it felt. They stood in silence for a moment, the cold pressing in around them. Madison's mind raced. How long could they survive in here? An hour? 2? She'd heard horror stories of people freezing to death in walk-in freezers. Their bodies found hours later, blue, and still. We need to stay warm, Nathaniel said, his tone practical. The best way to do that is to share body heat. Madison's eyes widened. Absolutely not. I'd rather freeze. Nathaniel's expression didn't change. Suit yourself. But when hypothermia sets in, you won't have a choice. Madison glared at him. You just fired me, humiliated me in front of my colleagues, and now you expect me to cuddle with you? I expect you to survive. There's a difference. Madison turned away, her anger flaring hot enough to momentarily ward off the cold. She paced to the far end of the freezer, putting as much distance between them as possible. Fine. I'll survive on my own. Nathaniel didn't argue. He simply leaned against one of the shelving units, his arms crossed, watching her with those unreadable gray eyes. Minutes passed. The cold grew more insistent, creeping through Madison's clothes, biting at her fingers and toes. She stomped her feet, rubbed her arms, did everything she could to generate warmth. But it wasn't enough. Her teeth chattered uncontrollably now, her whole body shaking. Across the freezer, Nathaniel looked cold but composed, his posture still upright, his breathing steady. How was he so calm? Madison's pride held out for another 10 minutes. Then, as her fingers started to lose feeling and her thoughts began to blur, she realized she had no choice. She walked back toward Nathaniel, each step an admission of defeat. He watched her approach, his expression neutral. Changed your mind? Madison wanted to spit out a sarcastic retort, but her jaw was too stiff from the cold. Instead, she just nodded. Nathaniel pushed off from the shelf and gestured to a relatively clear spot on the floor. Sit. They sank down together, their backs against the cold metal of the shelving unit. Nathaniel hesitated for only a second before wrapping an arm around Madison's shoulders, pulling her against his side. The warmth of his body was immediate and startling. Madison's first instinct was to pull away, but the heat radiating from him was too tempting. She leaned into him, hating herself for it, but unable to stop. Nathaniel's other arm came around her, cocooning her against his chest. This doesn't mean I forgive you, Madison muttered, her voice muffled against his shirt. Noted, Nathaniel replied, his breath stirring her hair. They sat in silence, the only sound their breathing, and the faint hum of the freezer's machinery. Madison's shivering began to subside, replaced by a strange, uncomfortable awareness of the man holding her. She could feel the steady thump of his heartbeat, the rise and fall of his chest, the surprising gentleness of his grip. He'd fired her. He'd humiliated her. And yet, right now, he was the only thing standing between her and freezing to death. It was the most confusing mix of emotions Madison had ever experienced. Nathaniel's arms around Madison were firm but not constricting, a practical embrace designed for survival rather than comfort. Yet as the minutes ticked by in the freezer's icy grip, something shifted. The cold forced proximity, and proximity forced conversation. Or at least, it forced Madison to stop being silent. "Your teeth are still chattering," Nathaniel observed, his voice low and close to her ear. Madison tried to pull herself together. "I'm fine. You're a terrible liar," she huffed, her breath a white cloud. "And you're a terrible boss." Nathaniel didn't respond immediately. When he did, his tone carried a hint of something Madison couldn't quite identify. Amusement? Regret? Fair enough. Madison blinked. That was not the response she'd expected from the arrogant billionaire who'd fired her less than an hour ago. She tilted her head slightly to look up at him. His face was partially shadowed, but she could see the sharp line of his jaw, the faint stubble beginning to show, and those gray eyes that seemed to see right through her. "Why did you really fire me?" she asked, the question slipping out before she could stop it. Nathaniel's gaze remained fixed on the freezer door. "I told you, the sugar flowers were flawed. That's not a reason. That's an excuse." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he sighed. "You're right." Madison's eyebrows shot up. "What?" It wasn't about the flowers. Nathaniel's arm tightened slightly around her, though Madison suspected he didn't realize he was doing it. "It was about maintaining control. I have a reputation to uphold. People expect a certain standard from me, a certain ruthlessness. If I let one mistake slide, even a small one, it sends a message that I'm getting soft." Madison stared at him, her anger momentarily forgotten in the face of this unexpected honesty. "So, you destroyed my career to protect your image? When you put it like that, it sounds worse than it is." "It sounds exactly like what it is," Madison shot back. But there was less heat in her voice now, replaced by a weary resignation. Nathaniel looked down at her, and for the first time Madison saw something other than cold calculation in his eyes. She saw weariness. A bone-deep exhaustion that had nothing to do with the freezing temperature. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. The words hung in the frigid air between them, startling in their simplicity. Madison's heart did a strange little flip. She wanted to stay angry, to hold on to her righteous fury, but the sincerity in his voice undermined her defenses. "You're sorry," she repeated, her tone skeptical. "Yes." Nathaniel's jaw tightened. "I don't apologize often, Miss Cole, so I'd appreciate it if you didn't make me regret it." Madison couldn't help it. She laughed, a short, sharp sound that echoed off the freezer walls. "You're unbelievable. I've been called worse, I bet you have." They fell silent again, but this time the quiet felt different. Less hostile, more contemplative. Madison's body had stopped shaking as much, Nathaniel's warmth seeping into her, chasing away the worst of the cold. She became acutely aware of how close they were, how her cheek rested against his chest, how his hand had settled on her arm, his thumb absently brushing back and forth in a gesture that felt almost protective. "This is so weird," Madison muttered. "Being trapped in a freezer or being trapped with me?" "Both." Nathaniel's lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile. "I've had stranger evenings." Madison snorted. "Somehow I doubt that. You'd be surprised. Tell me then. Distract me from the fact that I might die in a freezer with my former boss." Nathaniel considered her request, then began to speak, his deep voice a steady anchor in the cold. "When I was 12, my father took me to one of his business dinners. It was supposed to be a lesson in networking, in how to command a room. Instead, I spilled an entire glass of red wine on a senator's wife." Madison's eyes widened. "Oh no." Nathaniel nodded. "My father was furious. He made me apologize, of course, but the damage was done. For years, every time I saw that senator at an event, he'd bring it up, remind everyone that Nathaniel Archer once made his wife look like she'd been in a bar fight." Madison giggled despite herself. "That's mortifying. It was character building, and it taught me an important lesson, which was, That perfection is the only acceptable outcome. One mistake can haunt you forever. Madison's amusement faded. She understood now, at least a little. Nathaniel's relentless pursuit of perfection wasn't just about control. It was about fear. Fear of failure. Fear of judgment. Fear of being that 12-year-old boy who couldn't do anything right. "That's a lonely way to live," she said softly. Nathaniel's gaze dropped to her, and for a moment, the walls he kept so carefully constructed seemed to crack. "It is." They stared at each other, the air between them charged with something Madison couldn't quite name. Then Nathaniel cleared his throat and looked away. "What about you? What about me? Why did you become a pastry chef?" Madison shifted slightly, trying to find a more comfortable position against him. "It's going to sound silly. I doubt that." She took a breath, her words misting in the cold. "When I was a kid, my mom used to bake, nothing fancy, just cookies and cakes for birthdays. But she put so much love into it. I remember watching her in the kitchen, how she'd hum while she worked, how she'd let me lick the spoon. It was the happiest I ever saw her." Nathaniel listened, his attention wholly focused on her. "After she died," Madison continued, her voice quieter now, "I wanted to hold on to that feeling. So I started baking. At first it was just to remember her, but then it became more. It became my way of creating something beautiful, something that made people happy, the way my mom's cakes made me happy." Nathaniel's hand on her arm stilled. "I'm sorry about your mother." Madison nodded, swallowing past the lump in her throat. "Thank you." "How old were you?" 8. Nathaniel's expression softened, a rare vulnerability crossing his features. "That's too young to lose a parent." "Yeah." It was. They sat in silence, the weight of their shared confession settling around them like a blanket. Madison realized, with a start, that she didn't hate Nathaniel anymore. She didn't forgive him, not entirely, but she was beginning to understand him. And understanding, she thought, was a dangerous thing. The cold pressed in again, a reminder of their dire situation. Madison's fingers were numb despite being tucked against Nathaniel's side, and her toes felt like blocks of ice in her sneakers. "How long have we been in here?" she asked. Nathaniel checked his watch. Almost 45 minutes. Madison's heart sank. That meant they could have hours left before anyone found them. If anyone found them. Nathaniel must have sensed her rising panic because he shifted, pulling her even closer. "We'll be fine. Someone will notice eventually. You don't know that. I do. Gerard will realize I didn't leave the building. He'll come looking." Madison wanted to believe him, but doubt gnawed at her. What if Gerard assumed Nathaniel had left through a side exit? What if no one thought to check the freezer? "Stop," Nathaniel said firmly. "Stop what?" "Spiraling. I can hear it in your breathing. You're panicking." Madison exhaled shakily. "Can you blame me?" "No. But panicking won't help. We need to stay calm, stay warm, and wait." Easier said than done. Nathaniel's hand moved to her hair, his fingers gently combing through the strands in a gesture that was surprisingly soothing. "Then let me distract you." "How?" "Tell me about your best dessert. The one you're most proud of." Madison blinked, thrown by the question. "Why?" "Because I want to know. And because it'll keep your mind off the cold." Madison hesitated, then allowed herself to sink into the memory. "There was this cake I made for a little girl's birthday. She had leukemia, and her parents wanted to give her the best party possible. They asked me to make a castle cake, something magical. I spent 3 days on it, towers made of sugar, a drawbridge that actually moved, and edible flowers everywhere. When I delivered it, the look on her face, Madison's voice broke slightly. She looked at me like I'd given her the world." Nathaniel's hand stilled in her hair. "That's a beautiful story." Madison smiled through the tears prickling her eyes. She passed away 2 months later, but her mom sent me a letter saying that cake was one of the last things that made her daughter truly happy. Nathaniel was silent for a long moment. Then he said, his voice rough, "You're not just a pastry chef, Madison. You're an artist. And I was a fool to fire you." Madison's breath hitched. She looked up at him, her eyes searching his face. "Are you saying that because we're trapped and you feel guilty?" "I'm saying it because it's true." The sincerity in his voice undid something inside Madison. She felt the last of her anger crumble, replaced by a tentative, fragile warmth that had nothing to do with their shared body heat. "Nathaniel," she whispered. "Yes? Thank you. For what? For keeping me warm. For listening. For being human." Nathaniel's lips quirked into a small, almost self-deprecating smile. "Don't let that get around. It'll ruin my reputation." Madison laughed softly, the sound filling the small space between them. "Your secret's safe with me." Their eyes met, and suddenly the air shifted. Madison became hyper-aware of every point of contact between them, the press of his chest against her side, the warmth of his hand in her hair, the faint scent of his cologne mingling with the sterile cold of the freezer. Nathaniel's gaze dropped to her lips, and Madison's heart stuttered. Was he going to kiss her? Did she want him to? Before she could process the thought, a loud bang echoed through the freezer. Both of them jumped. "Madison?" A voice called from the other side of the door. "Mr. Archer? Are you in there?" Relief flooded through Madison. "We're here," she shouted, her voice hoarse. The door handle rattled, then swung open. Gerard stood there, flanked by 2 kitchen staff, his face pale with worry. "Thank God. We've been looking everywhere for you." Nathaniel stood, helping Madison to her feet. Her legs were stiff and unsteady, and she swayed slightly. Nathaniel's hand shot out, gripping her elbow to steady her. "Careful." Gerard ushered them out of the freezer, immediately wrapping a kitchen towel around Madison's shoulders. "Are you both all right? Do you need a doctor?" "We're fine," Nathaniel said curtly, though his hand remained on Madison's elbow. "Just cold." Madison nodded, though she wasn't entirely sure fine was the right word. Physically, she was okay. Emotionally, she was a mess. Gerard looked between them, his expression confused. "Sir, I thought you'd left." "And Madison?" "I thought you." "I was inspecting the freezer," Nathaniel interrupted smoothly. "Madison followed me in to discuss her termination." The door malfunctioned. Madison shot him a look. That was one way to put it. Gerard nodded slowly, clearly not entirely convinced but too relieved to press the issue. "Well, I'm glad you're both safe. Madison, you should go home and warm up." Nathaniel's hand tightened on her elbow. "Actually, Gerard, I need to speak with Madison privately first." Gerard's eyebrows rose, but he nodded. "Of course, sir." He and the other staff retreated, leaving Madison and Nathaniel alone in the now bustling kitchen. Madison crossed her arms, suddenly self-conscious. "What do you need to talk about?" Nathaniel hesitated, a rare uncertainty flickering across his face. "Your termination." Madison's heart sank. "Right. That." "About that," Nathaniel began, then stopped. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so uncharacteristically vulnerable that Madison's breath caught. "I was wrong." Madison blinked. "What?" "I was wrong to fire you. You're talented, dedicated, and you create art that brings people joy. The Whitmore would be lucky to keep you." Madison's mouth fell open. "Are you offering me my job back?" Nathaniel met her gaze, his gray eyes steady. "Yes, but more than that, I'm offering you a promotion. Head pastry chef, full creative control over the dessert menu, and a significant raise." Madison's mind reeled. This morning, she'd been fired. Now, she was being offered her dream job. It was too much to process. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because you deserve it," Nathaniel said simply. "And because I don't want to lose you." The last words hung in the air, weighted with a meaning Madison wasn't sure she was ready to unpack. She searched his face, looking for some hint of deception, but all she saw was sincerity. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes." Madison bit her lip, her mind racing. Part of her wanted to tell him to shove his offer where the sun didn't shine, to walk away with her pride intact. But another part, the part that had felt his warmth in the freezer, that had heard his apology and his story, wanted to stay, wanted to see where this unexpected connection might lead. "Okay," she said finally. "Yes, I'll take the job." Nathaniel's shoulders relaxed, and a genuine smile, small but real, crossed his face. "Good." Madison smiled back, her heart doing that strange little flip again. "But I have one condition." Nathaniel's eyebrow arched. "Which is?" "No more firing people over minor mistakes." Nathaniel considered this, then nodded. "Deal." They stood there, smiling at each other like fools, until Gerard poked his head back into the kitchen. "Mr. Archer? Your car is waiting." Nathaniel nodded, then turned back to Madison. "Get some rest. I'll see you tomorrow." Madison watched him go, her mind a whirl of confusion, excitement, and something else she wasn't quite ready to name. As the kitchen returned to its usual chaos around her, she touched her lips, remembering the way Nathaniel had looked at her in the freezer. This, she thought, was going to be complicated. The next morning, Madison arrived at the Whitmore Grand with a strange mix of anticipation and trepidation swirling in her chest. She'd barely slept, her mind replaying the events of the previous night on an endless loop. The freezer, Nathaniel's arms around her, his unexpected apology, and then the job offer that had left her reeling. As she pushed through the kitchen doors, she was met with a chorus of surprised exclamations. "Madison, you're back." Gerard bustled over, his round face creased with confusion and relief. "I heard about your promotion. Congratulations." "Word travels fast," Madison said, tying on her chef's coat. Gerard lowered his voice. "Between you and me, I'm glad Mr. Archer changed his mind. You're one of the best we have." Madison's cheeks warmed. "Thanks, Gerard." He patted her shoulder. "Your new station is in the back. We've set up everything you requested." "Well, everything Mr. Archer said you'd need." Madison raised an eyebrow. "He requested things on my behalf?" Gerard nodded. "A new stand mixer, top-of-the-line piping equipment, and he cleared out an entire section of the refrigerator for your projects. Said you needed space to create." Madison's heart did that annoying flip again. She forced herself to focus. "Right. Well, I'd better get started then." The morning passed in a blur of activity. Madison threw herself into her work, experimenting with new flavor combinations and techniques. She was in the middle of tempering chocolate when a familiar voice cut through the kitchen noise. "Miss Cole." Madison's hand jerked, nearly spilling the chocolate. She turned to find Nathaniel standing a few feet away, impeccable in a navy suit, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Archer," she said, proud of how steady her voice sounded. He gestured toward her station. "Do you have a moment?" Madison set down the bowl and wiped her hands on a towel. "Sure. What do you need?" Nathaniel's gaze swept over her work, lingering on the intricate chocolate sculptures she'd been shaping. "Impressive. Thanks." Nathaniel cleared his throat, a hint of awkwardness creeping into his demeanor. "I wanted to check in. Make sure you have everything you need." Madison studied him. Was he actually nervous? It was such a departure from his usual commanding presence that she almost smiled. "I have everything. Gerard's been very helpful." "Good." Nathaniel nodded, then seemed to hesitate. "Also, I thought perhaps we could discuss your new menu ideas." "Over dinner." Tonight. Madison's eyebrows shot up. Dinner? It's a business dinner, Nathaniel added quickly, to go over your plans for the dessert program. Right. Business. Madison tried to ignore the flutter of disappointment in her chest. What time? 7. I'll send a car. Nathaniel turned to leave, then paused. And Madison? Yes? Wear something nice. The restaurant I have in mind has a dress code. Then he was gone, leaving Madison standing amid her chocolate and her wildly conflicting emotions. A business dinner, she told herself firmly. That's all this is. But as the day wore on and 7 o'clock approached, Madison found herself standing in front of her closet, agonizing over what to wear. She finally settled on a simple black dress, elegant but not overly formal, and a pair of heels that made her legs look longer than they were. When the car arrived, Madison's nerves were at an all-time high. The driver took her to an upscale French restaurant on the Upper East Side, the kind of place where reservations were booked months in advance. Nathaniel was waiting at a corner table, the soft glow of candlelight casting shadows across his sharp features. He stood as she approached, his eyes sweeping over her in a way that made her skin tingle. You look beautiful. Madison's breath hitched. Thank you. You look. She paused, searching for a word that wouldn't reveal how affected she was. Presentable. Nathaniel's lips quirked. High praise. They sat, and a waiter appeared almost immediately, pouring wine and presenting menus. Madison tried to focus on the elegant script describing various dishes, but she was acutely aware of Nathaniel's gaze on her. So, Nathaniel began, setting down his menu. Tell me about your vision for the dessert program. Madison launched into her ideas, her passion for her craft overriding her nervousness. She talked about seasonal ingredients, artistic presentations, and creating desserts that told a story. Nathaniel listened intently, asking thoughtful questions and offering suggestions that surprised her with their insight. You really know your stuff, Madison said, halfway through her second glass of wine. I thought you were all business mergers and profit margins. I own hotels and restaurants, Nathaniel replied. It would be foolish not to understand the product. Plus, my mother was an excellent cook. I learned a lot from watching her. Madison smiled. You've mentioned her a few times. You must have been close. Nathaniel's expression softened. We were. She was the opposite of my father. Warm, creative, always encouraging me to pursue what made me happy instead of what was expected. What happened to her? She died when I was 16. Cancer. Nathaniel's voice was steady, but Madison heard the underlying pain. After that, my father became even more rigid. He said grief was a weakness, that the only way to honor her memory was to succeed, to build an empire she'd be proud of. Madison reached across the table, her hand covering his. I'm sure she'd be proud of you, Nathaniel, not because of your empire, but because of who you are. Nathaniel stared at her hand on his, then slowly turned his palm up, his fingers intertwining with hers. Thank you. They sat like that for a moment, the restaurant buzzing around them, but in their little corner, it felt like they were the only two people in the world. Then Nathaniel cleared his throat and gently withdrew his hand. We should order. Madison nodded, her skin still tingling from his touch. Dinner was exquisite, each course a masterpiece. But Madison barely tasted the food. She was too focused on Nathaniel, on the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, on the deep timbre of his laugh when she told a particularly funny story about a kitchen disaster. As the evening wore on, the conversation drifted from business to personal. They talked about their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. Madison found herself opening up in ways she rarely did, and Nathaniel reciprocated, revealing layers of himself she suspected few people ever saw. I never thought I'd say this, Madison admitted as dessert arrived, an elegant Carme Brûlée that she eyed with professional interest. But I'm glad I got trapped in that freezer with you. Nathaniel's gaze was intense. So am I. Madison's heart raced. This was definitely not just a business dinner. The realization should have scared her, but instead, it filled her with a giddy excitement she hadn't felt in years. When the check came, Nathaniel insisted on paying despite Madison's protests. Then he walked her outside, where the car was waiting. "Thank you for tonight," Madison said, turning to face him. It was, she hesitated, really nice. Nathaniel stepped closer, his hand coming up to gently brush a strand of hair from her face. It was. His fingers lingered on her cheek, and Madison's breath caught. For a moment she thought he was going to kiss her. She wanted him to, but then he dropped his hand and stepped back. "Good night, Madison." "Good night, Nathaniel." Madison climbed into the car, her emotions a tangled mess. As the vehicle pulled away, she looked back to see Nathaniel still standing on the curb, watching her go. That night, lying in bed, Madison replayed every moment of the evening. She knew she was in dangerous territory. Nathaniel was her boss, a billionaire with a reputation for being ruthless. Getting involved with him could end in disaster. But as she drifted off to sleep, all she could think about was the warmth in his eyes and the gentleness of his touch. And she knew, with a certainty that both thrilled and terrified her, that she was already falling for him. The following weeks at the Whitmore Grand were unlike anything Madison had experienced. As head pastry chef, she had the freedom to innovate, to push boundaries, to create desserts that were as much art as they were food. Her creations quickly became the talk of the hotel, with guests specifically requesting reservations just to try her latest masterpiece. But it wasn't just her professional life that was flourishing. Her relationship with Nathaniel, if it could even be called that, was evolving in ways that left her breathless and confused. He seemed to find excuses to visit the kitchen, always under the guise of business. But Madison noticed the way his eyes lingered on her, the way his voice softened when he spoke her name. One afternoon, Madison was putting the finishing touches on a lavender honey cake when Nathaniel appeared at her station. "Busy?" he asked. "Always," Madison replied, not looking up from the delicate sugared violets she was placing on the cake's surface. "But I can multitask." "Talk to me." Nathaniel leaned against the counter, his proximity making Madison's pulse quicken. "I have a favor to ask." Madison finally looked up, meeting his gaze. "I'm listening." "There's a charity gala this Saturday. It's for children's hospitals, a cause my mother was passionate about. I need a +1. Madison's heart stuttered. "You're asking me to go with you? If you're free, it's black tie. There will be a lot of important people there." She should say no. This was crossing a line from professional into personal territory. But the hopeful look in Nathaniel's eyes, so at odds with his usual confident demeanor, made it impossible to refuse. "Okay, I'll go." Nathaniel's face lit up with a smile so genuine it took Madison's breath away. "Thank you. I'll pick you up at 6. Saturday arrived far too quickly. Madison spent the day in a state of nervous excitement, trying on and discarding half a dozen dresses before finally settling on a midnight blue gown that hugged her curves and shimmered when she moved. When Nathaniel knocked on her apartment door at precisely 6 o'clock, Madison's hands were trembling as she opened it. Then she saw him, and her breath caught. He was devastating in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, his dark hair styled back, his gray eyes warm as they took her in. "You're stunning," he said, his voice rough. Madison felt her cheeks heat. "You don't look so bad yourself." Nathaniel held out his arm. "Shall we?" The gala was held at a grand ballroom in Manhattan, glittering with chandeliers and filled with New York's elite. Madison felt out of her depth, but Nathaniel's steady presence beside her kept her grounded. He introduced her to business associates and socialites, always with a hand at the small of her back, a gesture that felt possessive and protective all at once. As the evening progressed, Madison found herself actually enjoying the event. The cause was important, and Nathaniel's passion for it was evident in every conversation. He spoke eloquently about the need for better pediatric care, about his mother's volunteer work, about wanting to make a difference. Madison saw a side of him she'd only glimpsed before, a man who cared deeply, who wanted to use his wealth and influence for good. When the orchestra began to play, Nathaniel turned to her. "Dance with me?" Madison's heart pounded. "I should warn you, I'm not very good at this. I'll lead. You just have to trust me." Madison placed her hand in his, and he led her onto the dance floor. As they began to move, Madison realized he was an excellent dancer, guiding her effortlessly through the steps. "You're full of surprises," she murmured. "So are you," Nathaniel replied, his eyes locked on hers. They danced in silence for a moment, the world around them fading until it was just the two of them, moving in perfect sync. Madison felt something shift inside her, a recognition that this was more than attraction, more than a fleeting connection. This was something real, something that terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. Nathaniel's hand tightened on her waist, pulling her infinitesimally closer. "Madison, there's something I need to tell you." Before he could continue, a sharp voice cut through the moment. "Nathaniel Archer. Fancy seeing you here." They both turned to find a tall, elegant woman approaching, her smile predatory. She was stunning, with platinum blonde hair and ice blue eyes, dressed in a gown that probably cost more than Madison's rent. "Vanessa," Nathaniel said, his tone polite but cool. "Madison, this is Vanessa Sterling." "Vanessa," Madison Cole. Vanessa's gaze raked over Madison with barely concealed disdain. "Charmed." "So, Nathaniel," Vanessa continued, ignoring Madison entirely, "I heard you're expanding the Whitmore chain. We should discuss a partnership. My father's hotel group would be a perfect fit." "This isn't the time or place," Nathaniel replied. Vanessa pouted, a practiced gesture. "You always say that, but we both know you can't avoid me forever. Not after." She paused meaningfully. "Everything we shared." Madison's stomach dropped. "Everything they shared?" Nathaniel's jaw tightened. "That was a long time ago, Vanessa. And it's in the past." "Is it?" Vanessa's eyes glittered, "Because I remember things quite differently." Nathaniel took Madison's hand, his grip firm. "Excuse us." He led Madison away from Vanessa, his expression thunderous. "I'm sorry about that." Madison forced a smile. "Old flame?" "Something like that." Nathaniel's tone was clipped. "It ended years ago." Madison wanted to ask more, to understand the history between Nathaniel and the beautiful, confident Vanessa. But she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw was set. So she let it go. The rest of the evening was strained. Vanessa seemed to be everywhere, always in Nathaniel's line of sight, always watching with that knowing smile. Madison tried not to let it bother her. But jealousy was an ugly, insidious thing, curling around her heart and squeezing. When Nathaniel finally drove her home, the silence in the car was heavy. "I had a good time," Madison said as they pulled up to her building. "Despite, you know." Nathaniel turned to her, his expression serious. "Vanessa means nothing to me. You have to believe that." Madison met his gaze. "It's none of my business, Nathaniel. We're just—" She paused. What were they exactly? Friends? Colleagues? Something more? "We're just—" She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Nathaniel's hand came up to cup her cheek. "We're not just anything, Madison. And I think you know that." Madison's breath hitched, her heart pounded so loudly, she was sure he could hear it. Nathaniel leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away. But Madison didn't. She couldn't. When his lips met hers, it was like fireworks exploding in her chest. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, a question. Madison answered by threading her fingers through his hair, pulling him closer. Nathaniel groaned, deepening the kiss, his hand sliding to the back of her neck. Madison had been kissed before, but never like this. Never with such intensity, such barely restrained passion. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Nathaniel rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that for weeks. Madison smiled, her heart soaring. Me too. They sat like that for a long moment, wrapped up in each other, the outside world forgotten. Then Nathaniel pulled back, his thumb tracing her swollen lips. You should go inside. It's late. Madison nodded, reluctant to leave. Good night, Nathaniel. Good night, Madison. As Madison walked into her building, she couldn't stop smiling. She felt like she was floating, her entire body humming with happiness. But as she lay in bed that night, Vanessa's words echoed in her mind. We both know you can't avoid me forever. Not after everything we shared. Madison pushed the thought away. Nathaniel had said it was over, that Vanessa meant nothing. She had to trust him. But a small, nagging voice in the back of her mind whispered that things were never that simple. And as Madison drifted off to sleep, she couldn't shake the feeling that the happiness she'd found with Nathaniel was fragile. A beautiful dream that could shatter at any moment. The weeks following the gala were some of the happiest of Madison's life. She and Nathaniel were officially together, though they kept their relationship relatively private. In the kitchen, she was the head pastry chef. Creative and driven, in Nathaniel's world, she was his partner, the woman who made him laugh, who challenged him, who saw past the ruthless CEO facade to the man beneath. They fell into a rhythm, stolen moments in his office, late-night dinners at quiet restaurants, weekends spent exploring the city or holed up in Nathaniel's penthouse, talking for hours. Madison had never felt so seen, so cherished. Nathaniel was attentive and generous, surprising her with thoughtful gifts like a first-edition cookbook she'd mentioned in passing, or a weekend trip to a renowned pastry school in Paris. But beneath the surface of their happiness, cracks were beginning to form. It started small. A missed dinner because Nathaniel had to take an emergency business call. A terse conversation when Madison suggested he spend less time at the office. The reappearance of Vanessa Sterling at a Whitmore event, her presence a constant needling reminder of Nathaniel's past. Madison tried to brush it off. She understood that Nathaniel's work was demanding, that his empire required constant attention. But it was hard not to feel like she was coming in second to spreadsheets and board meetings. One evening, after Nathaniel canceled their plans for the third time that week, Madison sat alone in her apartment, staring at her phone. She wanted to call him, to tell him how she felt, but she didn't want to come across as needy or clingy. Instead, she threw herself into her work, creating a new dessert menu that pushed the boundaries of traditional pastry. She worked late into the night, perfecting each dish, channeling her frustration and hurt into something beautiful. The next day, Nathaniel showed up at the kitchen, his expression weary. Madison, can we talk? Madison set down her piping bag, her guard immediately up. Sure. Nathaniel glanced around at the bustling kitchen staff. Privately, they went to his office, the space where they'd shared so many intimate conversations. But today, it felt cold, sterile. Nathaniel closed the door behind them and turned to face her. I'm sorry I've been distant. Work has been overwhelming. Madison crossed her arms. You're always overwhelmed, Nathaniel. That's not an excuse. I know. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration. But there's something going on, something I didn't want to burden you with. Madison's heart skipped a beat. What is it? There's a hostile takeover attempt. A group of investors, led by Vanessa's father, is trying to buy out the Whitmore chain. If they succeed, I lose everything. Madison's anger evaporated, replaced by concern. Nathaniel, why didn't you tell me? Because I didn't want you to worry. Because I wanted to protect you from this mess. Madison stepped closer, taking his hands in hers. You don't have to protect me. I'm not some fragile thing that'll break. I want to be there for you. But I can't if you shut me out. Nathaniel's eyes met hers, filled with a vulnerability she'd rarely seen. I'm not used to relying on anyone. Madison squeezed his hands. Then it's time you learned. For a moment, Nathaniel just looked at her. Then he pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. I don't know what I did to deserve you." Madison rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "You didn't have to do anything. You just had to be you." From that moment, things shifted. Nathaniel began to open up about the pressures he was facing, and Madison found ways to support him, whether it was bringing him dinner when he worked late or simply sitting with him in companionable silence. But the threat of the takeover loomed large, and with it came Vanessa, who seemed determined to insert herself into every aspect of Nathaniel's life. She showed up at business meetings, at social events, always with a smile and a veiled comment designed to undermine Madison's confidence. One evening, at a dinner hosted by a potential investor, Vanessa cornered Madison in the ladies' room. "You know he's going to marry me, right?" Vanessa said, reapplying her lipstick with practiced ease. Madison stared at her. "Excuse me?" "Nathaniel and I. It's been arranged for years. Our families, our businesses. It all fits together perfectly. You're just a distraction, a passing fancy." Madison's hands clenched into fists. "You don't know what you're talking about, don't I?" Vanessa turned to face her, her smile cold. "Ask him about the agreement our fathers made. Ask him why he hasn't told you about it." Then she swept out of the room, leaving Madison shaken. That night, Madison couldn't hold it in any longer. "Nathaniel, is there something you're not telling me? About you and Vanessa?" Nathaniel's expression darkened. "What did she say to you?" "Just answer the question. Please." Nathaniel sighed heavily. "Years ago, before I took over the company, my father and Vanessa's father discussed a potential merger. Part of that discussion included the idea of Vanessa and me marrying." Madison's heart sank. And I refused. I've never had any intention of marrying Vanessa. That agreement, if you can even call it that, is ancient history." "But you didn't think to mention it to me?" Nathaniel reached for her, but Madison stepped back. "I didn't think it mattered." "It doesn't matter." Madison's eyes stung with tears. "It matters to me, Nathaniel. It matters that there's this woman who thinks she has a claim on you. And you didn't even tell me why." "I'm sorry." Nathaniel's voice was rough. "You're right. I should have told you. But you have to believe me, Madison. Vanessa is nothing to me. You're the one I want." Madison wanted to believe him. She did believe him, but the seeds of doubt had been planted, and they were growing, choking out the trust she'd built. The situation came to a head a week later. Madison was working late in the kitchen when Gerard approached her, his expression troubled. "Madison, there's something you should see." He handed her his phone. On the screen was a photo from a gossip website. It showed Nathaniel and Vanessa standing close together outside a restaurant, Vanessa's hand on his arm, both of them smiling. The headline read, "Archer and Sterling. Rekindling an old flame?" Madison's stomach turned. "When was this taken?" "Last night." Gerard's voice was gentle. "I'm sorry, Madison." Madison stared at the photo, her mind racing. Last night, Nathaniel had told her he was working late. He'd said he couldn't see her, and instead, he'd been with Vanessa. The betrayal cut deep, sharper than any knife. Madison handed the phone back to Gerard. "Thank you for showing me." She left the kitchen, her vision blurred with tears. She drove to Nathaniel's penthouse, her heart pounding. When he answered the door, he looked surprised to see her. "Madison? What's wrong?" Madison held up her phone, the photo displayed. "Want to explain this?" Nathaniel's face paled. "That's not what it looks like." "Really? Because it looks like you lied to me about where you were last night." "I didn't lie. I was working. And then Vanessa showed up at the restaurant where I was having a meeting." This photo was taken out of context. Madison laughed bitterly. "How convenient." Nathaniel's jaw clenched. You don't trust me. Madison met his gaze, her own eyes blazing. You keep giving me reasons not to. Nathaniel stepped forward, his expression desperate. Madison, please. You have to believe me. Nothing happened. Vanessa is manipulating the situation, trying to come between us. And she's succeeding. Madison shot back. Because you keep letting her into your life. I can't control what she does. No. But you can control what you do, and you chose to hide things from me. To keep secrets. To make me feel like I'm not important enough to be let into every part of your life. That's not fair. Isn't it? Madison's voice broke. I love you, Nathaniel. But I can't be with someone who doesn't trust me enough to be honest. The words hung in the air, raw and painful. Nathaniel reached for her, his hand trembling. Madison, don't do this. I can't do this anymore. Madison stepped back, tears streaming down her face. I need space. I need time to think. And with that, she turned and walked away, leaving Nathaniel standing in the doorway, his world crumbling around him. The days following their fight were the hardest Madison had ever endured. She threw herself into her work, creating new desserts with a ferocity that bordered on obsession. The kitchen became her sanctuary, the only place where she could focus on something other than the gaping hole in her heart. Gerard and the other staff could see she was hurting, but they gave her space, offering quiet support without prying. Madison was grateful. She didn't think she could talk about Nathaniel without breaking down completely. A week passed, then 2. Madison avoided the upper floors of the hotel where Nathaniel's office was located. She ignored his calls and texts, too afraid that hearing his voice would make her crumble. She needed to protect herself, to figure out if their relationship was worth the pain. One afternoon, as Madison was finishing a delicate souffle, Gerard approached with a hesitant expression. Madison, Mr. Archer asked to see you in his office. Madison's heart clenched. No, tell him I'm busy. He was very insistent. Madison set down her tools, frustration boiling over. I don't care how insistent he is, I'm not going. Gerard sighed. Madison, I think you should hear him out. Whatever happened between you two, he's been miserable. Everyone can see it. Madison wanted to stay strong, to hold on to her anger and hurt. But Gerard's words tugged at her. Was Nathaniel hurting as much as she was? Finally, against her better judgment, she nodded. Fine, I'll go. Nathaniel's office felt different as Madison stepped inside. The usually immaculate space was cluttered with papers, empty coffee cups, signs of a man who'd been working himself to the bone. Nathaniel stood by the window, his back to her. He looked thinner, more haggard than she'd ever seen him. You wanted to see me? Madison said, her voice carefully neutral. Nathaniel turned, and Madison's breath caught. His eyes were red-rimmed, his face drawn. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. Thank you for coming. He gestured to the chairs. Please, sit. Madison remained standing. I'd rather not. This won't take long. Nathaniel nodded, pain flashing across his face. I won't keep you. I just need you to know the truth. About what? The takeover. Vanessa. Everything. Nathaniel took a deep breath. The photo you saw, it was staged. Vanessa knew we were having problems, and she orchestrated the whole thing to drive a wedge between us. How do you know that? Because she admitted it. Nathaniel's voice was hard. I confronted her after you left. She laughed, said it was all part of her father's plan to destabilize me, to make me vulnerable so they could take over the company. Madison's anger wavered. Why didn't you tell me this sooner? I tried. You wouldn't answer my calls. Nathaniel stepped closer. Madison, I know I made mistakes. I should have been more open with you. Should have told you about the merger discussions. Should have fought harder to keep Vanessa out of our lives, but I never, not for 1 second, wanted anyone but you. Madison's eyes filled with tears. You hurt me, Nathaniel. I know. and I will spend the rest of my life making it up to you, if you'll let me." Madison looked at him, at the raw sincerity in his eyes, the desperation in his voice. She wanted to believe him, to forgive him, but the wounds were still fresh. "I don't know if I can trust you again." Nathaniel's face crumpled, but he nodded. "I understand. But before you make your decision, there's something I want you to see." He walked to his desk and pulled out a folder, handing it to her. Madison opened it, her eyes scanning the documents inside. They were contracts, agreements, all related to the takeover attempt, and at the bottom of each one was a note in Nathaniel's handwriting. "Rejected." "I turned them down," Nathaniel said quietly. "Every offer, every deal Vanessa's father proposed. I refused them all, even though it would have saved the company. Especially because it would have meant losing you." Nathaniel's voice was fierce. "The company means nothing to me without you, Madison. I'd rather lose everything than lose you." Madison's tears spilled over. She looked up at him, her heart breaking and mending all at once. "You really mean that?" "I've never meant anything more in my life." Nathaniel closed the distance between them, his hands gently cupping her face. "I love you, Madison Cole. I love your passion, your strength, your creativity. I love the way you challenge me, the way you make me want to be a better man, and I will do whatever it takes to earn back your trust." Madison's breath hitched. "I love you too. Then give me another chance. Please." Madison searched his eyes, looking for any hint of deception. All she saw was love, raw and unfiltered. Slowly, she nodded. "Okay. One more chance." Nathaniel's relief was palpable. He pulled her into his arms, holding her like she was the most precious thing in the world. "I won't let you down. You'd better not," Madison murmured against his chest. "Because if you do, I'll put salt in your coffee." Nathaniel laughed, the sound rusty but genuine. "Noted." They stood like that for a long time, wrapped up in each other, the world outside forgotten. When they finally pulled apart, Nathaniel smiled, a real full smile that lit up his entire face. "There's one more thing." "What?" Nathaniel reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a small velvet box. Madison's heart stopped. "Nathaniel, before you panic, it's not what you think." "Well, it is, but not yet." He opened the box to reveal a delicate silver bracelet with a single charm, a tiny whisk. "It's a promise," Nathaniel said. "A promise that I will always support your dreams, that I will never take you for granted, and that one day, when we're ready, I'm going to ask you the big question. And when I do, I hope you'll say yes." Madison's tears were flowing freely now, but they were tears of joy. "This is the most ridiculously sweet thing anyone's ever done for me. Is that a yes? To the promise? Or to the future question?" "Both." Madison smiled through her tears. "Yes to both." Nathaniel slipped the bracelet onto her wrist, then kissed her, soft and sweet and full of love. From that moment, things changed. The takeover attempt eventually fell through, Vanessa and her father's schemes exposed and thwarted. Nathaniel and Madison's relationship grew stronger, built on a foundation of honesty and trust. Months passed. Madison's desserts became legendary, drawing food critics from around the world. Nathaniel continued to expand his empire, but he made sure to prioritize his time with Madison, learning to balance work and love. And then, on a quiet evening in the same freezer where their story had begun, now renovated and turned into a wine cellar, Nathaniel got down on one knee. "Madison Cole, will you marry me?" Madison, laughing and crying at the same time, pulled him to his feet. "Yes. 1,000 times yes." Their wedding was a small, intimate affair, held at the Whitmore Grand with Madison's creation, a stunning 5-tier cake adorned with sugar flowers that didn't weep, as the centerpiece. As they danced their first dance as husband and wife, Nathaniel whispered in her ear, "Who would have thought getting trapped in a freezer would be the best thing that ever happened to me?" Madison smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "Only you would say something like that. But you know what? I wouldn't change a thing." Neither would I, and as they swayed to the music, surrounded by friends and family, Madison realized that sometimes the most unexpected moments lead to the greatest love stories. She'd found her happily ever after, not in spite of the freezer incident, but because of it. Because it had forced two stubborn, guarded people to see past their defenses and find the warmth in each other's hearts. The end. Before you go, don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10 in the comments. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.